when young boys used to stumble down the aisle in their dad's bathrobes with drapery cords around their waists. These youngsters may be valiantly attempting to balance cardboard crowns on their heads while they carry treasures for the baby Jesus, who is lying so quietly up there on the stage. No matter what you may or may not know about these guys, I'm sure you believe that no Christmas is complete without the wise men. We love these men. They are every bit as important as the shepherds, angels, cows, and sheep. And finally, there's the star. Where, oh where, would we be without that star? That guiding light that kept leading the men on their journey. Thank goodness for the star. At least it ended up leading the men to Jesus in the end. But first, these men had to take a detour through Jerusalem. Now then, if you really listen to the story unfold this morning, you might just realize that we actually aren't told how many men there were. And we don't know exactly where they came from, other than from the general direction of the east, wherever that was. And we're never told these men are kings. Wise men, yes, but not kings. And even though some of you may proudly point out that you know their names, the gospel writer never actually named them. In fact, the names Matthew or Gaspar and Balthasar come to us from legends added to the story over the centuries. It almost seems as though we've made up most of the story in order to fill in all the blanks that Matthew left for us. Maybe all those holes in the story make us feel a bit uncomfortable. We might begin to wonder just why this story is included in the gospel after all. Well, there are some very good reasons for the author of Matthew to tell this wonderful and mysterious story. This is a story about hope and fulfillment. The bright white star shone in the wise men's eyes for a long time. Some scholars believe these men read the scriptures from Isaiah that we just heard, and as the bright white star appeared, they set out in hopes of finding the promise Isaiah described. They lifted up their eyes, looked around, and decided to set out on a journey that could lead them from darkness to light. This is also a story about God's all-encompassing love. These wise men weren't local people. They came from a great distance. Some writers speculate that they actually came from what was enemy territory. They most likely didn't look like people of Israel at the time. In other words, these men were outsiders. They were foreigners, strangers. They were invited and welcomed into God's circle of grace and love. Later, as Jesus goes about his ministry, we hear the story of God's love reaching out to ostracized lepers, immoral prostitutes, despised Romans, greasy tax collectors on the take. This wise man's story is truly a story about God's unconditional welcome. And this is a story about surprises and the unexpected. According to Matthew, the wise men who were looking for a new king decide to show up in Jerusalem looking for a palace. Naturally. Kings live in palaces, right? What do you know? They knock on King Herod's door, who was startled, to say the least. He's almost speechless when the men walk in and announce that they're looking for a new king. Poor King Herod isn't sure what to do. So he consults with his own wise men, who turn around and consult their charts and scrolls and decide that maybe these guys are right. There could be a new king who is living in that little backwater town called Bethlehem. That's one when our wily King Herod gets the bright idea to send the man down the road a few miles to find out for themselves if there is a new king. Now, if truth be told, Herod is frightened right out of his golden sandals. The last thing Herod needs is competition. So he begins to plot and scheme, but that's a whole other story. Anyway, as you know, the king these wise men were searching for wasn't to be found in any palace. Instead, what they found was an ordinary baby with ordinary Mary and Joseph as proud parents of a new son. Once upon a time, there was a man who sat atop his camel in the middle of the desert. He was enormous. His bushy gray beard was as big as the bejeweled cloth crown that he wore on his head, and his portly body was woven together with clever magic, decorating the rotund results of too many feasts in embroidered silk. The glittering golden robe around his waist disappeared somewhere between two folds of fat. "I'm returning from a visit to Bethlehem," he explained dramatically to a merchant who stood below him on the sand, staring up at the gestures of the speaker, who wore a ring on every chubby finger. The camel's rider let out a booming laugh. "Just call me the wise man," he said. "And you?" The itinerant salesman shrugged. "Call me the merchant," he replied, mounting his fuzzy camel, which was tied to a string of heavy-laden beasts of burden. "There's water ahead," the merchant said, nodding. He motioned to the three men behind him, who each led 6 camels, their bodies weighed down with merchandise that scented the scorched afternoon with cinnamon cloves and anise, which mixed with all the smell of perspiration and animal. "It would be safer if we traveled together," the wise man agreed. When they reached the oasis, the merchant pulled out dried fruits, dates, a loaf of bread, and a leg of lamb from his packs, hoping to impress the bejeweled man he had met. He even found one of his best bags of wine and presented it as an intended gift. But in return, the wise man gave him a handful of gold coins. The merchant had no opportunity to share any of the salesman's stories. It was the wise man who turned out to be the storyteller. "The baby didn't look like a king," said the wise man as he wiped grease from his beard with the sleeve of his garment. "If he showed me even 2 babies, I could not tell you which was the infant king of the Jews. But I would feel it somehow. Yes, I would know for certain if I were again in his presence." "What makes you think the baby is a king?" the merchant asked, throwing a bone into the campfire. "Even I could make that claim. Anybody can claim." The wise man was perturbed at the obvious ignorance of the merchant. "Why, it's been prophesied," he said. "I can't believe you didn't see the star that lit up the sky with magnificent light. Fabulous! There's never been anything like it. And I know, I studied the stars. I followed it and met up unexpectedly with 2 others who traveled with me to Bethlehem. A perfect place for this birth. We were seeing prophecy come true in our very lifetime." The 3 of us met King Herod, who also said he wanted to honor the child. "Herod is waiting for word about the new king now." "From you?" asked the merchant. The wise men shrugged sheepishly. "Perhaps. So why are you headed in the opposite direction?" "Well, if you must know, I had a dream that warned me not to return to Herod. So what else do you have to eat?" Saving himself future trips, the merchant pulled a heavy bag from one of the camels and set it close to the wise man. "It's difficult for me to imagine Mary, being pleased with the tale of a child who will perhaps compete against him, challenge him. He said, thinking for a moment, the light you spoke of could have come from the palace where the child was born. And what was it you said earlier you gave this child? Frankincense and myrrh? Stuffed with dates and lamb, looking like another mound of sand in the desert, the wise man lay down flat on his back and sighed a sound of relief that turned into a loud belch. There was no palace. The child was in a simple dwelling, born of simple parents. Oh, I think you've been had, said the merchant, poking at the fire. The child's father will sell your gifts. No, it wasn't like that, said the wise man. When we found the child, we knew immediately we were in the right place. As poor as it was, as tired and pathetic as the parents looked, as ragged as their belongings, I felt very humble. We fell to our knees, all of us. We hadn't planned to, but all strength left our bodies, and we were limp with worship, I suppose. After visiting a new king, I should come away with something material, one would think. But I came away with nothing but awe. But why? Asked the merchant. It was a hoax. Oh, I don't think so, said the wise man, actually looking the part of a king for a moment. My friend, I would not have started out on this journey if I didn't believe what the stars told me and what my heart tells me now. I may not know all the secrets of the universe, but I know something miraculous has happened, and I was able to be there before it was over. Long after the wise man had fallen asleep and was snoring, the merchant put his things together, summoned his men, and mounted his camel, starting off into the night, turning around, going in the direction from which he had come. He set off for Bethlehem, hoping it was not too late to see the miracle. The prophet Isaiah spoke words of light and hope to people who were living in some very dark days. Many had returned recently from exile only to find their homeland in ruins. People were wondering if their lives in the city would ever be returned. For many of us, it may seem as though we too are living in some days of uncertainty and doubt. But the prophet assures us that if we lift up our eyes and look around, the radiant light of God's grace will shine on all of us. All of us. The story of the wise men reminds us that it's okay to stargaze. For it is in the stargazing that we see the promise of new life that is so generously given to us through Jesus the Christ, who came to earth to share all the joys and sorrows, hopes and disappointments that we experience. May the light of the bright white star forever shine in your eyes, and may you share that light with everyone. For we who claim to be followers of Christ are called to share the good news. God's light and love shine on all people, everywhere. Friends, neighbors, strangers, and outsiders are invited in and are welcome to stargaze along with us. Amen. I invite you now to join Bob and me together. We read responsively the Litany of Darkness and Light. We wait in the darkness, expectantly, longingly, anxiously, thoughtfully.
The darkness is our friend. In the darkness of the womb, we have all been nurtured and protected. In the darkness of the womb, the Christ child was made ready for the journey into light.
You are with us, O God, in darkness and in light.
wonder of the universe, blankets of stars, the solitary gloamings of distant planets.
It was the darkness that allowed the Magi to find the star that guided them to where the Christ child lay.
You are with us, O God, in darkness and light.
In the solitude of darkness, we sometimes remember those who need God's presence in a special way. The sick, the unemployed, the bereaved, the persecuted, the homeless, those who are demoralized and discouraged, those whose fear has turned to cynicism, those whose vulnerability has become bitterness.
Sometimes in the darkness, we remember those who are near to our hearts, colleagues, partners, parents, children, neighbors, friends. We thank God for their presence and ask God to bless and protect them in all that they do, at home, at school, as they travel, as they work, and as they play.
You are with us, O God, in darkness and in light.
Sometimes in the solitude of darkness, our fears and concerns, our hopes and our visions rise to the surface. We come face to face with ourselves and with the road that lies ahead of us. And in that same darkness, we find companionship for the journey.
In that same darkness, we sometimes allow ourselves to wander and to worry whether the human race is going to survive.
We know you are with us, O God, yet we still await your coming. In the darkness that contains both our hopelessness and our expectancy, we watch for a sign of God's hope. Amen. As we enter into our time of